My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the comments, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. They called me a monster, a coward, a disgrace. One fleeting moment, one rash decision, and my entire life unraveled, exposing the raw, ugly truth of who I had become. After listening to the whole story, you will definitely share your opinion in the comments. So let's move towards the story. The city was a sprawling beast, a concrete jungle that hummed with 1,000 unseen anxieties. For Arthur Finch, it was a cage. Not a literal one, of course, but the invisible bars of his own making. He rode his motorcycle, a gleaming black beast of a machine, through the labyrinthine streets, the roar of the engine a desperate attempt to drown out the gnawing silence within. He was a man adrift, a shadow flitting through the lives of others, leaving no discernible mark. His days were a monotonous blur of solitary pursuits, punctuated by fleeting moments of fleeting satisfaction found in fleeting acts of defiance. He was a stranger to kindness, a connoisseur of cynicism, and a firm believer that the world owed him something it was stubbornly refusing to deliver. This wasn't always Arthur. Once, he was different, a boy with bright eyes and a boundless curiosity, a young man who believed in the inherent goodness of people. But life, in its cruel, relentless fashion, had chipped away at him, piece by agonizing piece, leaving behind the hardened shell he now inhabited. The loss of his parents, the betrayal of a trusted friend, the crushing weight of unspoken expectations, each blow had driven him further into himself, building walls so high that even the sun struggled to pierce through. His existence was a carefully constructed fortress, designed to keep the world out, and more importantly, to keep himself from feeling anything at all. He had mastered the art of indifference, a shield against the pain he no longer knew how to process. The motorcycle was his only solace, a mechanical extension of his own rebellious spirit, a symbol of the freedom he craved but never truly achieved. It was on one of these aimless rides, a particularly bleak Tuesday afternoon, that his world, already teetering on the brink, would be irrevocably altered. He was cutting through a quiet suburban street, the kind with manicured lawns and children's laughter echoing in the distance, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of his own life. A small, scruffy terrier, its tail wagging with an innocent enthusiasm Arthur hadn't felt in years, darted out from behind a parked car. It was chasing a worn tennis ball, its entire being focused on this simple joy. Arthur, consumed by his own internal tempest, barely registered the dog. His reflexes, honed by years of navigating chaotic city traffic, were usually sharp, but today, a strange lethargy had settled over him. He could have swerved, he could have slowed down, but something, a flicker of something dark and ugly within him, took hold. A perverse impulse, born from a lifetime of unaddressed hurt, surged through him. It was a fleeting, almost unconscious desire to disrupt, to inflict a small measure of the chaos he felt internally onto the orderly world around him. In that split second, a cruel thought, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of his apathy. He could just not swerve, not break. He could just let the inevitable happen, or even worse, subtly guide it. His boot, heavy and unforgiving, lashed out, not with the full force of a deliberate kick, but a sharp, dismissive nudge, enough to send the small dog sprawling, yelping in surprise and pain. The tennis ball rolled harmlessly into the gutter. Arthur felt a fleeting surge of something akin to satisfaction, a dark, fleeting triumph over the innocuous creature. It was a pathetic victory, a testament to how far he had fallen. He sped off, the sound of the dog's whimper quickly fading into the roar of his engine, dismissed as just another casualty in his self-imposed war against the world. He told himself it was an accident, a minor inconvenience, something to be forgotten as quickly as it had occurred. But the image of the small dog, its innocent eyes wide with confusion and hurt, would linger, a persistent, unwelcome visitor in the back of his mind. He didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, that this seemingly insignificant act of casual cruelty had just set in motion a chain of events that would force him to confront every ugly truth he had so desperately tried to bury. He didn't know that the small, scruffy terrier belonged to Mr. Wallace, a retired, gentle soul who lived a quiet life of routine and simple pleasures. And he certainly didn't know that Mr. Wallace had a son who was currently on a movie set miles away, a son named Jason. The name wouldn't have meant anything to Arthur, lost as he was in his own desolate world. But soon, very soon, it would mean everything. The silence of his apartment that night was heavier than usual, punctuated by the rhythmic thumping of his own uneasy heart. He tried to dismiss the dog, to push it from his thoughts, but its injured yelp echoed in the cavern of his mind. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid doing little to soothe the growing unease. He told himself it was just a dog, a minor incident. But the truth was, even in his hardened state, a tiny crack had formed in his carefully constructed facade of indifference. The seed of guilt, long dormant, had begun to stir. He tossed and turned in his bed, the city lights painting ghostly shadows on his ceiling. He saw the dog's eyes again, saw the surprise, the pain, the complete lack of understanding. It wasn't anger he felt then, but a profound, sickening shame. He had become what he despised, a bully, a purveyor of unprovoked harm. The thought made him physically ill. This was new, this level of visceral disgust with himself. He had spent so long numbing himself, he had almost forgotten what it felt like to truly feel something, anything, beyond the dull throb of his own discontent. He knew, deep down, that something had to change. But how? And what would it take to finally break free from the prison of his own making? He had no answers, only the unsettling certainty that the world, in its own inscrutable way, was about to demand them from him. The next morning, Arthur woke with a familiar ache in his chest. But this time, it wasn't just the dull throb of existential dread. It was something sharper, a pinprick of guilt that refused to be ignored. He tried to shake it off, to immerse himself in his usual routine of coffee and digital escapism. But the image of the yelping dog, its small body airborne for a horrifying second, kept flashing before his eyes. He found himself pacing his cramped apartment, the silence amplifying his unease. He knew he should forget it, just another nameless interaction in a city full of them, but a strange compulsion tugged at him. Against his better judgment, he found himself back on his bike, riding slowly this time, tracing the route he'd taken yesterday. The suburban street looked much the same, idyllic and untouched by his moment of casual cruelty. He spotted the house where the dog had emerged, a modest home with a well-tended garden. A man was out front, watering a rose bush, his back to Arthur. He was an older gentleman, with silver hair and a gentle stoop to his shoulders. Arthur felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was it. This was the house. He could just ride past, pretend he hadn't seen anything. But the burgeoning guilt, a sensation he hadn't truly felt in years, propelled him forward. He dismounted his bike, the heavy thud of his boots on the pavement sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet street. The old man turned, a mild curiosity in his eyes. Arthur felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to flee, to disappear into the anonymity of the city. But he stayed. "Excuse me," Arthur mumbled, his voice rough from disuse. I think I might have accidentally hit your dog yesterday." The words felt clumsy, inadequate. He braced himself for anger, for accusations, for the condemnation he knew he deserved. The old man, Mr. Wallace, lowered his watering can. His expression softened, a touch of sadness replacing the initial curiosity. "Oh, little Max," he said, his voice gentle. "He's a bit shaken up, but he's all right. Just a bruised leg. He's always chasing that old tennis ball." There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet concern for his pet. This unexpected lack of aggression disarmed Arthur completely. He had anticipated a confrontation, a chance to unleash his own pent-up frustrations, but Mr. Wallace's calm demeanor stripped him of his defenses. "I'm truly sorry," Arthur said, the words surprising even himself. He meant it. The weight of his own callousness pressed down on him. "I wasn't paying attention. It was careless of me." Mr. Wallace simply nodded, a flicker of something in his eyes that Arthur couldn't quite decipher. Understanding? Pity? It happens. Mr. Wallace said, a small, weary smile playing on his lips. He's a lively one, always underfoot. He paused, looking at Arthur with an almost unnerving directness. You seem troubled, son. The simple observation, delivered without judgment, hit Arthur like a physical blow. It was as if Mr. Wallace had seen past the leather jacket and the guarded exterior, straight into the raw, exposed nerves beneath. Arthur flinched, instinctively retreating into his shell. It's nothing, he muttered, looking away. Just a bad day. But Mr. Wallace didn't press. He simply stood there, radiating a quiet calm that was alien to Arthur's chaotic world. Well, Mr. Wallace said, breaking the silence, Max is a good boy. He'll bounce back. He gestured towards the house. Would you like to come in? Have some tea? I was just about to make some. The invitation hung in the air, unexpected and almost surreal. Arthur, who usually recoiled from human interaction, found himself hesitating. It was an offer of simple kindness, extended by the very person he had wronged. It was a lifeline in his turbulent sea of self-loathing. Part of him screamed to refuse, to maintain the distance he had so carefully cultivated. But another, smaller part, a forgotten flicker of the boy he once was, yearned for it. He found himself nodding slowly, a silent acceptance of the unexpected invitation. As he followed Mr. Wallace into the cozy, unassuming home, Arthur felt a strange sensation, like a forgotten muscle stretching after years of disuse. It was vulnerability, raw and uncomfortable, but mixed with a tentative flicker of hope. He still didn't know the full extent of the ripple he had created, the true identity of Max's other owner, or the profound transformation that awaited him. He only knew that, for the first time in a long time, he felt a tiny spark of something other than emptiness. He was about to step into a world that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, about kindness, and about the unexpected paths to redemption. The aroma of freshly brewed Earl Grey tea filled Mr. Wallace's living room, a scent so comforting and unfamiliar to Arthur that it almost brought a sting to his eyes. He sat stiffly on an old, comfortable armchair, a mug cradled in his hands, feeling utterly out of place. Max, the scruffy terrier, limped in, a bandage neatly wrapped around his leg, and settled onto a worn rug near Mr. Wallace's feet, casting a wary but not hostile glance at Arthur. Mr. Wallace, ever the gentle host, spoke softly about his day, about the roses in his garden, about old memories of his late wife. He made no demands, asked no probing questions about Arthur's life, simply offered a calm, unassuming presence. Arthur, usually so guarded, found himself listening, truly listening, for the first time in what felt like years. There was a quiet dignity to Mr. Wallace, a resilience that spoke of a life lived with both joy and sorrow, but always with grace. As the afternoon wore on, Arthur felt the rigid tension in his shoulders begin to ease. He even managed a few tentative contributions to the conversation, small, hesitant words that felt like foreign objects on his tongue. He found himself telling Mr. Wallace about his motorcycle, about the open road, about the fleeting sense of freedom it offered. He didn't mention the hollowness that often accompanied it, the persistent feeling of being lost. My son Jason, he loves animals, Mr. Wallace said at one point, his eyes twinkling as he looked at Max. He's always been that way. Max is his dog, really. He leaves him with me when he's off working. Arthur nodded, feigning polite interest. The name Jason didn't register beyond a vague sense of familiarity, a name he might have heard in passing. He was too caught up in the unexpected comfort of the moment, the quiet balm Mr. Wallace's presence provided. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the room, Arthur knew he had to leave. He stood, feeling a strange reluctance. Thank you, Mr. Wallace, he said, the words feeling genuinely heartfelt, for the tea and for everything. Mr. Wallace smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Any time, son. Max here will be glad to see you again. Won't you, boy? Max wagged his tail weakly, a flicker of acknowledgement in his dark eyes. Arthur found himself returning to Mr. Wallace's house every few days. At first, it was out of a lingering sense of obligation, a need to assuage the guilt that still gnawed at him. But soon, it transformed into something else entirely. It became a quiet ritual, a respite from the clamor of his own troubled mind. He would help Mr. Wallace with small chores, fixing a leaky faucet, pruning the rose bushes, even walking Max, who, with each passing day, showed less wariness and more enthusiasm for Arthur's company. Max's leg healed, and soon he was chasing his tennis ball with renewed vigor, an endless source of quiet amusement for Arthur. Through these simple acts, Arthur began to experience a profound shift within himself. The walls he had built around his heart, brick by painful brick, were slowly beginning to crumble. He found himself looking forward to these visits, to the unassuming wisdom of Mr. Wallace, to the unconditional affection of Max. He started to notice the beauty in the ordinary, the vibrant colors of Mr. Wallace's garden, the cheerful chirping of birds, the warmth of the sun on his face. These were things he had once been blind to, lost in his own self-imposed darkness. One afternoon, a few weeks after the initial incident, Arthur was helping Mr. Wallace clean out his garage. They were sorting through old boxes, dusty relics of a life well lived. Mr. Wallace pulled out a framed photograph, a proud smile on his face. It was a picture of a younger Mr. Wallace, standing beside a man with a familiar, intensely focused gaze. The man in the photograph held a dog that looked remarkably like Max. "That's my son, Jason," Mr. Wallace said, his voice brimming with pride. "He's a famous actor, you know. Action movies, mostly. That's Max when he was a pup. Jason always loved that dog." Arthur froze. The mug he was holding clattered against the concrete floor, thankfully empty. He stared at the photograph, his mind reeling. The intensely focused gaze, the chiseled jawline, the unmistakable presence. It was Jason Statham, the tough-as-nails action star, a man whose image was synonymous with strength and retribution. And Arthur had kicked his dog. A cold, nauseating wave washed over him, far more potent than any guilt he had felt before. The comfortable calm of the afternoon shattered, replaced by a sudden, terrifying dread. His newfound peace, so fragile and tentative, felt like it was about to be obliterated. The blood drained from Arthur's face. The photograph, once a sentimental piece of a father's pride, now felt like a death warrant. Jason Statham. The name echoed in his mind, each syllable a hammer blow. This wasn't some minor celebrity, some easily placated public figure. This was the man who, on screen, could dismantle an army with a single glare, whose characters lived and breathed retribution. And Arthur had, with a casual flick of his boot, inflicted pain upon something this man clearly cherished. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. All this time, as he had slowly, painfully, begun to mend, the fuse of his own undoing had been silently burning. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to snatch the photograph, to destroy the evidence of his colossal mistake. But he was rooted to the spot, his mind racing through every action movie cliché, every cinematic scenario where the hero wronged, unleashed swift and brutal justice. He imagined the headlines, the humiliation, the sheer, inescapable consequences of his foolishness. The fragile peace he had found in Mr. Wallace's home evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that spread through his limbs. Mr. Wallace, oblivious to Arthur's internal meltdown, continued to reminisce about Jason's childhood, about his early acting days, about his unwavering love for animals. "He's always been very protective of Max," he chuckled, completely unaware of the bombshell he had just dropped. A real soft spot for the little guy. Each word, intended to be endearing, only served to amplify Arthur's terror. Protective. Soft spot. The words morphed into ominous warnings in his head. Arthur managed to stammer out a hasty excuse about having to leave, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. He practically bolted from the garage, leaving Mr. Wallace looking on with a puzzled expression. He fumbled for his motorcycle keys, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped them. The roar of the engine as he sped away was a desperate attempt to outrun the truth, but it was no use. The image of Jason Statham, his face a mask of determined fury, was burned into his mind. He rode aimlessly, the city lights a blur through his helmet visor. The freedom he usually found on his bike was gone, replaced by a suffocating sense of impending doom. He imagined the phone call, the inevitable knock on the door, the cold, hard stare of a man who didn't just play tough guys, but embodied a certain unyielding resolve. What would he do? What could he do? Apologies seemed utterly insufficient. Explanations would sound hollow. He had kicked his dog. There was no escaping that cold, hard fact. For the first time in a long time, Arthur felt genuine fear, a raw, primal fear that transcended his usual apathy. But beneath the fear, a different emotion stirred, a flicker of something he hadn't expected. It was a profound sense of shame, not just for the act itself, but for the callous person he had been. The man who could casually inflict pain on an innocent creature for a fleeting, dark satisfaction. He had seen glimpses of a better version of himself in Mr. Wallace's living room, in Max's wagging tail. Now, that nascent hope felt crushed under the weight of his past. He pulled over to the side of a deserted road, the engine idling, its hum the only sound in the suffocating silence. He took off his helmet, the cool night air doing little to calm his racing heart. He had spent his life running from pain, from responsibility, from himself. But this, he realized with a sickening lurch, was different. He couldn't run from Jason Statham. More importantly, he couldn't run from the realization of who he had been and what he had done. The night stretched before him, long and agonizing. He knew he had to face this, whatever this might entail. The unexpected kindness of Mr. Wallace had opened a door he thought was permanently sealed. Now, a much larger, much more terrifying door was about to swing open, revealing the ultimate test of the transformation he had unknowingly begun. What awaited him beyond that door he couldn't say. But he knew, with a chilling certainty, that his life would never be the same. The dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of orange and gray. But for Arthur, the world remained cloaked in a pervasive shadow. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Max's startled yelp, followed by the formidable, unblinking stare of Jason Statham. The fear was a cold, constant companion, but it was now laced with something far more complex. A burning desire to make amends, not just for the dog, but for the callous individual he had been. The casual indifference he had worn as a shield had crumbled, revealing the raw, exposed nerves beneath. He was ashamed, truly, deeply ashamed of his past self, and a strange, almost painful longing for redemption began to stir within him. He knew he couldn't run. This wasn't a speeding ticket or a forgotten bill. This was an affront to a deeply protective man, a man who, he now realized, was also a devoted son to the gentle Mr. Wallace. The thought of bringing distress to Mr. Wallace, who had shown him nothing but kindness, weighed on him even more heavily than the fear of Jason Statham's wrath. He had to face it, whatever the consequences. He had to show Mr. Wallace, and by extension Jason, that the man who had kicked Max was not the man he was trying to become. With a heavy heart, Arthur rode back to Mr. Wallace's house. The familiar suburban street now felt charged with an almost unbearable tension. He dismounted his bike, his legs feeling strangely unsteady. He approached the front door, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to disappear into the anonymity he once cherished. But he pushed through the fear, remembering the quiet wisdom in Mr. Wallace's eyes, the warmth of Max's furry head nudging his hand. He took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. It wasn't Mr. Wallace. Standing there, filling the doorway with an imposing presence, was a man whose face was instantly recognizable from countless movie posters. Jason Statham stood before him, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. He was taller than Arthur had imagined, his presence radiating an intensity that was far more potent in person than on screen. There was no theatrical anger, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet, formidable presence that made Arthur's blood run cold. "Arthur, isn't it?" Jason's voice was low, gravelly, precisely as it sounded in the films. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a confirmation that Arthur's worst fears were now undeniably real. Arthur could only nod, his throat suddenly dry. He felt a wave of nausea, the kind that precedes a painful reckoning. He braced himself for a barrage of accusations, for a chilling display of the controlled fury he had seen countless times on screen. Instead, Jason simply gestured for him to come in. The silence in the hallway was deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Mr. Wallace emerged from the living room, a concerned frown on his face. "Jason, son, what's going on?" he asked, his gentle voice a stark contrast to the palpable tension. Jason offered his father a reassuring glance, then turned his gaze back to Arthur. "Dad told me about Max," Jason said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And he told me about you, Arthur." The weight of those words, spoken with such quiet conviction, was heavier than any shout. It wasn't just about the dog. It was about the trust Mr. Wallace had unknowingly placed in him, and how Arthur had initially betrayed it. Arthur swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Statham," he began, his voice hoarse, I know what I did. There's no excuse. It was a cowardly, senseless act. I was in a bad place, but that's no justification. I'm truly, profoundly sorry. For Max, and for the worry I caused your father." He looked directly into Jason's eyes, trying to convey the depth of his remorse, the genuine change that had begun to take root within him. He didn't offer excuses or blame. He simply owned his actions, raw and unadorned. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but also, in a strange way, the most liberating. He had finally stopped running. Jason Statham listened, his gaze unblinking, unreadable. Arthur felt every word of his apology hang in the air, heavy with the weight of his past actions and the precariousness of his present situation. He expected anger, a swift, decisive judgment. Instead, Jason turned his attention to Max, who had padded into the hallway, tail tentatively wagging at the sight of his other owner. Jason knelt, gently running a hand over Max's head, his fingers brushing the mended fur where the bandage had been. The action was soft, tender, a stark contrast to the hardened image Arthur knew. "He's a good boy," Jason said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Always has been. My dad tells me you've been helping out, walking him, looking after the garden." He straightened up, his eyes meeting Arthur's once more. This time, there was a flicker of something in their depths, something that wasn't anger, but a profound discernment. "My dad also told me you found him on the street, alone, a long time ago." "Max, I mean." Arthur nodded, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Yes, years ago. I found him near the shelter. He was lost." The words felt oddly profound, resonating with his own journey. A ghost of a smile touched Jason's lips, quick and almost imperceptible. "So, you know what it's like to find something you care about, something that needs looking after." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Max is family. My dad is family. And when someone harms what's family, you tend to take it personally." There was no threat in his tone, but an undeniable statement of fact, a quiet affirmation of his protective nature. Arthur braced himself. This was it. The reckoning. He deserved it. "I understand completely," Arthur said, his voice steadier now, stripped of its initial panic. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mr. Statham. I just wanted to tell you how truly sorry I am, and to acknowledge the harm I caused. I know it's not enough, but it's the truth." Jason simply studied him, his gaze piercing, as if trying to see through to Arthur's very core. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Arthur felt a strange sense of calm settling over him. He had faced his fear, admitted his wrongs, and now, whatever came next, he would meet it. He had done what he could, and that, in itself, was a victory of sorts. Finally, Jason spoke, his voice thoughtful. "My father, he's a good judge of character, Arthur. He tells me you've changed. He says you're a good man now." He looked at Mr. Wallace, who nodded gently, a soft, encouraging smile on his face. "He's not usually wrong." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. Mr. Wallace's faith in him, even after what he had done, was a balm to his raw soul. It was an affirmation that the difficult, internal work he had been doing, the painful journey of shedding his hardened exterior, had not gone unnoticed. "What you did, it was reckless," Jason continued, his gaze returning to Arthur. "But it wasn't malicious, was it? My dad says you were just lost." The word lost resonated deeply within Arthur, echoing the profound emptiness that had defined his existence before Max and Mr. Wallace had unknowingly entered his life. "He also says you've been nothing but kind since then. And Max seems to like you." Max, as if on cue, nudged Arthur's hand with his head, a silent testament to Jason's words. Arthur looked down at the dog, a wave of profound gratitude washing over him. Max, the innocent catalyst, had inadvertently set him on a path towards redemption, a path he never would have found on his own. He looked back up at Jason, a question forming in his eyes, a desperate hope he dared not voice. He had braced for fury, for retribution, for the embodiment of every action hero trope. Instead, he found a quiet thoughtfulness, a nuanced understanding that surpassed anything he could have anticipated. This wasn't the end he had envisioned, but a crossroads, a moment of profound, unexpected grace. The air in the hallway, once thick with tension, now held a delicate, fragile sense of understanding. Jason Statham, the formidable action star, was not delivering the cinematic retribution Arthur had braced for. Instead, he was offering something far more profound, a chance at genuine atonement. He wasn't dismissing Arthur's mistake, but he was acknowledging the transformation that had occurred since. "Look, Arthur," Jason said, his voice softer now, a hint of something akin to empathy in his tone. "What you did was wrong. There's no getting around that. But my dad, he sees something in you. And Max," he glanced down at the dog, who was now nudging Arthur's hand with his head. "Max clearly feels it too." He paused, his eyes thoughtful. "True strength, Arthur, isn't just about how hard you can hit. It's about recognizing your mistakes, taking responsibility, and striving to be better. It's about being kind when it's harder to be angry." Arthur felt a wave of emotion wash over him, relief, gratitude, and a profound sense of humility. He had expected to face a vengeful hero, but instead, he had encountered a man who understood the nuances of human struggle, a man shaped by the same quiet wisdom that emanated from his father. "I want to help," Arthur said, his voice cracking slightly. "Whatever I can do to make it right, for Max, for Mr. Wallace, I'm here." Jason nodded slowly. "My dad loves this place. He's getting older and he could use more help around here. Not just with the garden, but with company. Max needs a consistent hand, someone he trusts." He looked at Arthur, a challenge in his eyes, but also an invitation. "You want to make things right? Stay. Help him. Be the man my dad already sees you becoming." The offer was simple yet monumental. It wasn't about money or punishment. It was about responsibility, about connection, about building a life rooted in something real and meaningful. It was the antithesis of the detached, solitary existence Arthur had clung to for so long. And so Arthur Finch stayed. The visits to Mr. Wallace's house, which had begun out of guilt, transformed into a cherished routine, a cornerstone of his new life. He continued to help Mr. Wallace with the house and garden, but more importantly, he became a companion, a confidant. He learned to listen, to truly connect, to offer silent support. Max became his shadow, a constant, loving reminder of the journey he had embarked on. He saw the world through new eyes, appreciating the simple joys, the quiet moments of peace, the profound beauty in acts of kindness. Over time, Jason would visit, not as an intimidating figure of retribution, but as a son checking in on his father, and as a silent observer of Arthur's genuine change. There were no grand pronouncements of forgiveness, no dramatic apologies exchanged. Instead, there was a quiet, mutual respect that grew. Born from shared concern for Mr. Wallace, and Max Arthur found himself speaking openly with Jason about his own struggles, about the emptiness that had driven him, about the slow, arduous process of rebuilding his inner world. Jason, in turn, offered quiet encouragement, a testament to the unexpected depths of his character. Arthur still rode his motorcycle, but now, the roar of the engine was no longer a desperate attempt to drown out his inner turmoil. It was a joyful sound, a symbol of freedom found not in escape, but in connection. He had learned that true strength wasn't about shutting out the world, but about opening himself to it, embracing both its pain and its profound capacity for kindness. The man who had once kicked a dog out of callous indifference had found his redemption in the gentle home of an old man and the unconditional love of a small, scruffy terrier. And in doing so, he had discovered a truth more powerful than any fear, that even the smallest act of kindness or cruelty can set in motion a chain of events that leads to an unforeseen transformation, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead us home.